I am Diane Daniel, and this is my story. By the time this night came, I was an old man. 80 years, maybe more. I had stopped counting the way a man stops counting waves once he has spent his whole life by the sea. I still remember the taste of Jerusalem's bread, though I have not tasted it since I was a boy dragged in chains to Babylon. I remember my mother's hands. I remember the temple courts before the fire took them. All of that lives in me still, buried under 6 decades of exile, but never gone. I tell you this so you understand. What happened in the den was not the beginning of my faith. It was the proof of it. A lifetime of small, quiet choices had been building toward that one night, though I did not know it while I was living them. An old man in a new kingdom. Babylon had fallen. I had watched the handwriting appear on the plaster wall at Belshazzar's feast. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And that same night, the Medes and Persians poured through the gates like a river breaking a dam. I remember the sound of the city changing hands. Not so much a battle as a swallowing. By morning, Darius the Mede sat where Belshazzar had sat, and I, an old Hebrew who had served 3 kings already, wondered if my usefulness had finally run out. It hadn't. Darius set 120 satraps over his kingdom, and above them, 3 administrators to keep the accounts honest and the king's interests safe. I was one of the 3, and I say this not from pride, but because it is simply what happened. I distinguished myself above the other 2 administrators and the satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. That is what the king's own scribes wrote of me. Darius began to think of setting me over the whole kingdom. I felt the weight of that possibility the way you feel a storm before you see it. Because favor in a foreign court is never just a gift. It is also a target painted on your back. The other administrators and satraps began circling me, the way jackals circle a wounded animal, except I was not wounded. That was precisely the problem. They searched my accounts. I could feel them doing it, going through years of my grain reports, my tax records, the correspondence I had handled for 2 kingdoms now. Late at night, lying on my mat with the window open toward the west, toward home, toward Jerusalem, I would never see again in this life. I would think, let them look, there is nothing to find. And there wasn't. Scripture itself says they could find no corruption in me, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. I will not pretend that discovery didn't matter to me. There is a strange, lonely kind of relief in being scrutinized and coming out clean. But underneath the relief was something colder, a knowledge settling into my stomach like a stone. If they cannot destroy the man, they will destroy him through the one thing that cannot be compromised. They will come after my God. The trap. They came to me eventually, not to accuse me, but to congratulate the king. I watched them process into the throne room, robes trailing, faces arranged into practiced deference, and every instinct I had built over 60 years in foreign courts told me something was wrong. Men that pleased do not usually mean well. "O King Darius, live forever," they said, and I remember how the words scraped against my ears even as they were meant to soothe the kings. They proposed a decree that for 30 days, any man who prayed to any god or man except the king would be thrown into a den of lions. They dressed it up as flattery, as honor, as the kind of thing a great king deserves. Darius, who I do not believe was a cruel man, only a vain one in that moment, signed it into the unalterable law of the Medes and Persians, a law that, once written, not even the king himself could unmake. I was not in the room when it was sealed. I heard of it from a servant, breathless, glancing over his shoulder as he told me. I remember standing very still. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat, loud in my ears, the way it gets when the body understands a truth before the mind has fully caught up. 30 days. One decree. One old man's habit of opening his window 3 times a day to pray toward a city he would never see again. I will tell you honestly, for a moment, fear moved through me like cold water, finding every crack in a wall. I thought of the den. I had seen the king's lions before, pacing behind their bars, muscles moving like something poured rather than born. I thought of my body, thin and old, against jaws that could break a bull's spine. But under the fear, something steadier was already speaking. "Daniel, you have prayed toward Jerusalem 3 times a day since you were a young man torn from everything you loved. Will you stop now, in the winter of your life? Because men with jealous hearts wrote your death into law. I went up to my upper room. The window that faced Jerusalem was open, as it always was. I could see the flat rooftops of Babylon spreading out below me, hear the bleating of goats somewhere in a courtyard, smell bread baking, dust rising off the streets in the evening heat. I knelt down, as he did aforetime. I did not close the shutters. I did not lower my voice. I did not so much as glance to see who might be watching from the street below. Understand, this was not defiance for its own sake. I was not trying to be a martyr, and I was not trying to prove a point to Darius or to my accusers. I simply could not do otherwise. Prayer was not a performance I could suspend for 30 days and resume once it was safe again. It was the breath of my life. A man does not stop breathing to prove he is alive. They were watching, of course. I heard later that they had gathered outside, waiting like men waiting for a trap to spring, and it did, because I gave them exactly what their law required. I gave thanks to my God, just as I had always done. Before the king. They brought their accusation to Darius with a speed that told me they had been ready for hours, maybe days. I was not present for that conversation, but I have imagined it more times than I can count. The king's face changing as he understood what he had signed, what these men had used his own vanity to build. I heard, from those who were, that Darius was greatly displeased with himself, that he labored until the sun went down, trying to find some crack in the law he could slip me through. He loved me. I believe that plainly. He was not a wicked king undone by wickedness. He was a flattered king undone by flattery. And now he was trapped by his own signature, the same way I was about to be trapped by lions. They came for me at dusk. I remember the light, that low gold Babylon light that turns even mud brick walls to something like copper, cutting long shadows across the courtyard as the guards took hold of my arms. I did not fight them. What was there to fight? The law was the law. Even the king could not undo it. They led me to Darius himself before they took me to the den, and I will never forget his face. An old king, my friend in whatever strange way a king and a foreign administrator can be friends, looking at me with something between grief and helplessness. Your God, whom you serve continually, he said, and his voice cracked on the words, he will deliver you. I did not answer him with false confidence. I did not tell him I was certain God would save my body from those jaws, because I was not certain of that. I had read the accounts of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace, and I remembered that even they had said, our God is able to deliver us, but if not, we will not bow. Faith was never a guarantee against suffering. It was a trust that held whether the lions closed their mouths or opened them. The den. The mouth of the den was a stone pit sunk into rock, and they lowered me down with ropes into darkness that swallowed the last of the evening light almost instantly. I heard, before I saw, the shifting weight of huge bodies against stone, breath that rumbled low in broad chests, the click of claws finding footing. My eyes adjusted slowly, and there they were, shapes moving in the black, eyes catching what little light slipped through, low and gold like coals. I will not lie to you and tell you fear left me the moment I hit the floor of that pit. My body understood exactly what stood before it, and every part of me that was simply flesh and blood wanted to scream, to press myself against the stone wall, to become as small and invisible as possible. But I had spent 60 years learning what to do with fear. You do not pretend it is not there. You simply refuse to let it be the only voice in the room. I knelt. I could not help it. The same posture I had knelt in every day of my life before that window. And I prayed. Not loudly, not with eloquent words. I think I only said something like, my God, you have known me since I was a boy in Jerusalem. You have kept me faithful through Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar and now Darius. If this is where my story ends, let it end in your hands and not theirs. Above me, I heard the great stone rolled across the mouth of the den, heard it sealed with the king's own signet and the signets of his nobles, so that nothing, not the king's mercy, not my own strength, could change what happened next. And then the darkness had my full attention, and so did the lions. I felt something move near me, not a strike, not the tearing I had braced for. A shape passed close enough that I felt the heat of its breath, and yet, nothing. I do not have poetry grand enough to describe what filled that pit alongside the lions and me. I can only tell you that Scripture's own words are the truest ones. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. I did not see the angel with my eyes the way I saw the lions, but I felt the room change. I felt a presence larger and steadier than the fear, larger even than the animals themselves. And somewhere in that darkness, the terror in my chest loosened its grip, degree by degree, until I could breathe. I sat with lions all that long night the way another man might sit with old friends by a fire. I do not fully understand it even now. I only know that I was not alone in that pit, and the one who was with me was greater than every jaw and claw in Babylon. Morning. Darius, I learned later, had not slept. No music, no food, nothing to comfort him. He had spent the whole night pacing, and at the first gray light he ran to the den himself, not sending a servant as a king might, but going with his own feet, his own voice cracking as he called down into the dark. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? I remember the sound of my own voice coming up out of that pit, hoarse from a night of prayer and stillness. O King, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also toward you, O King, I have done no wrong. I heard him weep before I heard the order to lift the stone. They drew me up out of that den into a morning I had not been sure I would see, and Scripture tells the rest plainly. No wound was found on me, because I believed in my God. My accusers were not so fortunate. The same den, the same lions, and this time the beasts did what beasts do before their bodies had even reached the floor. Darius wrote a new decree that day, one that went out to every people and nation and language in his kingdom, that all should tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. What I carried forward. I am an old man telling you this now, years later, and I want you to understand what that night actually taught me, because it was not simply that God can shut the mouths of lions. It is this: faithfulness is built in the small, unseen rooms of your life long before it is tested in the pit. I did not decide to trust God the night I was thrown to the lions. I had already decided, kneeling at that window, morning after morning, year after year, when no one was watching and nothing was at stake. When the great test came, there was no time to build faith from nothing. I only had to stand on what was already there. I do not know what den you are facing tonight. Perhaps it is illness or grief, or a fear that paces just outside the door of your heart, breathing low in the dark. I cannot promise you the mouths will always be shut, not in the way mine were. Even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not promise themselves that. But I can tell you this: the God who was with me in that pit does not change with the century. He is not less present with you than he was with an old man in Babylon. Kneel at your window. Keep praying, even when the decree says not to. Whatever comes of it, you will not be facing it alone. If you have been blessed by this story, subscribe, like, and share it with AFR.